I'm really excited. These are two of my favorite people in the world that we're going to be talking with today. We have Jackie and Vicky. So they've both had long COVID, and you might have run across them before. I've interviewed both of them for my podcast before and for a couple of my summits before as well. They're incredible people. What we're going to be talking about today, though, is actually hormones. So we're specifically going to be focusing on women. You guys who are out there who have long COVID and maybe your hormones are being affected, or ME/CFS or any of those types of illnesses. If you're interested, then I'll find somebody else to interview about that as well, because certainly testosterone levels get affected also. But I know that for women, for sure, your cycles get affected. How they affect you actually is more appropriately put, can just get to a really difficult place, as well as perimenopause and menopause. So welcome, Vicky and Jackie. Why don't we start off? Vicky, can you tell me in a nutshell a little bit about your background? I know that that's difficult, but I would love for people to get a sense of kind of where you're coming from with this.
Okay. Like Jackie, we're both Oxygen Advantage and Butico certified breath instructors. But my background before long COVID was a personal trainer, a wellness coach, and a dietitian. So those kind of all rolled into one, and adding the breathing in there, it really helps understand many aspects of long COVID. But obviously, Jackie and I focus on the breathing, but learning about these hormones for women, that was something I did a little bit when I was training women, because I had a lot of high school, college athletes, and you definitely see a pattern of how you can train a female through her cycle to get all the benefits. What I didn't realize was how breathing was affected. So in a nutshell, it comes right back to breathing.
Cool. Very cool. Jackie, how about you? A little background for you.
Yeah, sure. So I actually was a musician. Well, I still am a musician, but that is less of what I'm now doing. My main instrument was cello. I did a lot of performing. I was doing a lot of teaching, working in schools with lots of children, working with adults. Very active life. Exercise was a huge part of what I did. That was how I met my partner, was hill walking. And yeah, when I then got sick, it turned my life on its head, as it does for most people when that happens. And I went on this whole journey of discovery. Sounds a bit kind of silly, doesn't it? But it kind of was, where I just wanted to know what was going on. So I dived down every rabbit hole I could find, the first of which was breathing. It was the first thing that I found that really helped me. I started the Long COVID podcast. And eventually, through that and through some of the wonderful people that I met, I have now fully recovered. And I think like Vicky, but in a slightly different way, it really does come back to breathing. Breathing underlies everything. It underlies literally every system in the body. It is so entwined with the nervous system, which is something that I now have a much bigger understanding of and just use in every aspect of my day. What is my nervous system telling me right now? What is it doing? So yeah, breathing, nervous system, the whole lot. And it's amazing how it just completely changes your life, but actually in this instance, in a good way, I would say.
Yeah. And I know that I think both of you and I have talked before about how there are blessings within these illnesses, but we're not going to get into that right now. For those of you who are watching, I do like to keep these, to about 20 or 30 minutes, because I know that it can be a lot of information. If you want more information, then I suggest coming to one of my summits, because we do longer interviews there. We interview a lot of people. So if y'all don't mind, I'm going to talk to Jackie about menstruation and Vicky about perimenopause and menopause. I mean, I'll just give y'all a little bit of background. I'm currently dealing with perimenopause, and I had reached such a great point. My fibromyalgia was gone. I'd gotten over long COVID a while ago. gotten over ME/CFS a while ago, and I was doing really well. And even with my menstrual cycles, I was doing really well. I was taking something called Chasteberry / Vitex for a long time, and they were very easy. Whereas before they had not been. And then I hit perimenopause and everything freaking flew out the window. But Jackie, let's start with the typical menopausal cycle, because I know that they're different for everybody. So I don't even know what a good question is to ask. Why don't we talk about how long COVID and other similar illnesses can affect hormones?
Yeah, and I think that question goes both ways. How does long COVID, or, insert chronic illness here, impact our menstrual cycle? And also, how does our menstrual cycle impact on our long COVID, for example? Because it does absolutely go both ways. We know that, long COVID, again, as an example, does mess around with a lot of people's cycles. Some people will notice them, changing in length, changing in severity, and certainly kind of getting that symptom exacerbation in the second half of the menstrual cycle. So if we think of our cycle, for simplicity's sake, kind of in two halves. So we've got our first half where everything is kind of normal. And then our second half, where we have this rise in progesterone. And the rise in progesterone is what kind of largely causes the stuff to happen. So progesterone is a respiratory stimulant. So in the second half of our cycle, we will see a rise in our breathing rate. That is not something that we can stop from happening. And that rise in our breathing rate will affect things like our heart rate and all of the other stuff. It's going to put a stressor on our body. We already have stresses on our body with long COVID. We don't need more. It's also going to make us far more sensitive to all sorts of stressors. So if we think our breathing rate is faster, then we're probably going to be more upper chest. And that means that we are going to be kind of closer to that fight flight point anyway. And, it's going to take less to tip us over into that fight flight. And again, with long COVID, we tend to be closer than we want to that point anyway. In fact, many of us are already there. So it's kind of, adding fuel to the fire, so to speak. So, we can't stop that progesterone from rising. We can't stop that breathing rate from rising. But what we can do is start to work on our response to it. How can we be more resilient? How can we make our overall breathing better? So when we do get that rise, it's a lower grade fire on top of a lower grade fire, rather than kaboom, so to speak, which is what a lot of people notice. So we do get a lot of, kind of symptom exacerbation in that second half. That is very, very common. And, indeed, if you were to look, I notice this myself now, and I'm so much more aware of it than I used to be. So, in my second half of my cycle now, I notice that. I notice my breathing is faster. If I'm trying to do my cadence breathing, I know that I'm going to be breathing slightly shorter than I would be. And I know that what the effect that has on my body. So I know that, okay, my sleep isn't going to be as good. I am going to need to focus on that kind of emotional health piece. It is not the time where I'm going to be beating out personal bests. It's not the time for really, kicking hell out of my body. The time for that is the first half of my cycle. But, also it's it's working with it rather than against it, isn't it? I can't stop these things from happening in my body, but what I can do is, work with it. What can I do to help? It's never a perfect thing, is it? So I think I've veered kind of majorly off topic. But yeah,
No, actually, that's
absolutely,
perfect.
breathing is huge here. How can we use the breath to influence that emotional health, to influence that nervous system, you know, and the two are very entwined. And how can we kind of, you know, lifestyle wise work with that as well, rather than against it, because that's what I did for years. And newsflash, it didn't work very well.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, what we're talking about here is even beyond people who have these chronic illnesses, long COVID and so on, just being a woman and having these fluctuations. So, if you could give us an example of, first of all, how you adapt your breathing practice, just a simple example. And then, secondly, one lifestyle change that you make during that second half.
Oh, just one.
I know.
I think, yeah, I mean, with the breathing practice, I would say I do more breathing practice when my progesterone is high. You know, I mean, you know, practice what I preach and everything, but, you know, I can get lazy with some of my breathing practices in my first half because, you know, you don't use them till you need them sometimes. But in that second half, you really, really notice it. So things like yoga nidra, you know, hugely, hugely powerful. You know, even sort of 5-10 minutes sort of thing. But actually, one of the things that I probably use the most is just that bog standard diaphragm breathing. You know, I know that if I'm breathing faster, then I am less likely to be using my diaphragm. So actually, what I do a lot of the time is I will put my hand up here because that's a hugely powerful signal of safety, which sometimes you need when you're starting to feel that. So I got you. And then I'll put my other hand down on my diaphragm and my lower ribs, and it'll really allow me partly to calm anything down that's starting to get a little bit, you know, a little bit fight flighty, but also breathe into that hand, you know, that mind muscle connection. You know, I can really feel that my diaphragm is moving and I know that everything's going to be okay. So I think that's probably, I mean, I think at all times that's probably my go-to exercise. But certainly at this point, you know, if I'm starting to feel myself, yeah, a little bit fight flighty, a little bit stressed, a little bit whatever it is. So I think that's probably the breathing exercise that I would do the most. And sometimes things will normalize very quickly within a couple of breaths. And sometimes maybe I need to close the laptop down and go sit for 5, or even go lie down for 5 if it's been one of those weeks, you know. So yeah, so breathing wise, I think that's what I would say. Gosh, in terms of lifestyle, I think again, you know, recognizing when my body is under siege, you know, because that's what it can kind of feel like. So you know, I exercise is such a huge part of my life, and you know, I am just so ecstatic to have that back. But yeah, as I said, it really is working with the body rather than against it. So you know, if I have a weekend and that sort of coincides with that kind of, oh, my progesterone's really high this weekend. Okay, you know, it'll be like, right, well, I'm not going to not do anything. You know, I'm gonna go up in the mountains, or I'm gonna go for a walk, but maybe it's a, you know, a shorter walk, or maybe it's got less ascent, or maybe we take more time over it. And absolutely, there's going to be a cold water dunk in there somewhere, because again, that is really going to help with that nervous system. It's really going to help with any inflammation as well, because that as well is as a factor. So yeah, I think, you know, don't stop living your life, but you know, make your life fit your, you know, work together. I think, you know, it's not always, you don't always need to be running at 110%. You know, that's not healthy for anyone at any point. But especially for us with these fluctuations, it's super important to recognize those times where, you know, let's work at 60% for these couple of days, or less. You know, you don't always have to be, you know, hitting everything really hard. And I think that's quite ironic for me to be saying, because I was always going at 150% before, and I loved that. But now looking back on it, it's like, you know, that's great sometimes, but it's also not great all the time. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and especially for, of course, our people who are dealing with long COVID and chronic fatigue syndrome and things like that. That is, we touched on earlier some of the blessings of these kinds of illnesses. And I definitely think that one of them is giving ourselves the permission to slow down. And like you were saying, we don't have to be at 150% or even all the time.
And actually enjoying the slow days as well. Like I would never have enjoyed a day where I wasn't going at it 110%, as you say. Whereas now, like, it's the balance. I think that is one of the things that I've learned and that I've really taken so much from this experience is balance in your life. Like being busy, being, doing all the things, that adrenaline rush, like that's great. I love that, and it's great being able to do that. But also, like, have those days where you do chill out, have those days where you sit on your beach, whatever your beach is for you, and really, balance the two out, because I think, that's what life has got to be. It's got to be balance. It's got to be play and work and relaxation and, all of this stuff in kind of equal measure. That's kind of healthy.
Yeah.
Can I just have a quick interject? Just talking about how far we've come, as women, we now have so many tools to use to track something like our cycle. So when we're especially when we're still in that menstrual cycle, we are now able to track our cycle. So we can then almost be aware of when that second phase of our cycle is happening, when we need to be very gentle with ourselves. So, it's always the build in the first two cycles and then the maintain or be gentle in the second part. And once we start tracking our cycle, then we have a little bit of power. And I think power, because that's something we lose, it empowers us to understand that this is something that may happen. I'm going to be aware that I need to be gentle. I need to not push and do my breathing exercises. But, the trackers are something that years and years ago we didn't have. So I just think it's a great model for women to understand exactly where they are in the cycle, especially if they're dealing with long COVID or ME, CFS, any of the chronic illnesses, because that way, when something does trigger, they can then say, you know what, I understand why this is happening. I need to be ready with my breathing exercises and take it from there.
Absolutely. And this is a great segue to talking to you, Vicky, about perimenopause and menopause. So I know that one of the trickiest things about perimenopause is that whereas in a kind of normal, and I'm going to put that in quotation marks because for some people they don't have a normal cycle, right? Even
there's no such thing as normal.
Right, exactly. But for the purposes of this discussion, you do have that typical, the first part of the cycle, first half of the cycle, where you do have more energy, and then the second half of the cycle where things can get a little bit rockier because of hormones and what's happening. And with perimenopause, what some people experience, not everybody, but what some people experience is that there's kind of no rhyme or reason to what's happening with the hormones and where you are. And so why don't we talk a little bit about that, Vicky? And then my understanding is that once you get into menopause, it gets a little bit easier because you're not having all these crazy fluctuations all the time. You still might need to do something like bioidentical hormone replacement therapy or something like that to help out. But yeah, so let's chat about that. What do you do when the hormones are all over the place most of the time? What do we do?
Well, you know what? It's interesting because I hear in your voice, Lorrie, that this is a typical perimenopausal conversation that we suddenly feel like everything is chaos. And chaos is something that is actually going on with our hormones. So you so correctly said, in our menstrual cycle, it's a lovely wave and we go up and we go down, and it is very rhythmical. As soon as you get into perimenopause, it is absolute chaos. It is up, down, it's go up a mountain, down a mountain very quickly. And these valleys and drops have no rhythm to them. And that's why we feel like we need to get through this. We need to rush through this. And this is how it feels the same way in our body. So our hormones are literally, there's no rhythm in them at all. And that is one of the most difficult things for people to deal with, because we don't know, even if we're tracking things, you cannot tell the spike in the estrogen or progesterone or what is going on. And
it feels like, I just want to pop in here, it feels like when I was a teenager and just oh my god, like depressed. I have it under control now, but for the first year maybe, it was like I am a stinking teenager again. This sucks.
Well, you know what? One of the things that Jackie and I say in our workshop when we're talking about hormones, if you look at the life cycle of women, you go into puberty and you're like crazy. It's like all these new hormones. Woo! Yep. And then you have your menstrual years, and then you go into this perimenopause. It's like going through puberty backwards.
Absolutely.
So, it's that whole thing. It's just come round again. And that's why we kind of like, oh, I've felt this before, but it's different because we've already sort of had some rhythmical years in between. But, the sad thing is that people with long COVID, the average age of someone with long COVID is 42 years old, and it's a woman. So many, many women are dealing with perimenopause. And one of the things that we can do going through this, because there's so much we can't do, we have to let our bodies just pass through this cycle, is tracking things like heart rate variability. And the reason that we do this is because heart rate variability is such a great indicator of how resilient our body is to stress. So if we start seeing that our heart rate variability is dipping, we know that we are more apt to slip into the fight or flight, the breathlessness, the upper chest breathing, the hyperventilation syndrome. So it's one of the things that gives us a little bit of control. The other thing that's going to happen is our sleep is really going to be affected, because when you go through menopause, even though it's not a female hormone, but perimenopause and menopause, you see a dip in people's melatonin levels. So that also means, on top of everything else, we are going to have difficulty getting a really good night of sleep. So it goes back to the one thing that we can control, and that's our breathing, because we know that by using these breathing methods, we can calm our body. In a time of panic or just feeling like hot flashes, the psychological impact of a hot flash is much more than the fact that our body is doing something strange. It's the feeling of it actually coming on, that sort of unknown. So it's so easy to recognize that if that happens, we need to return to our breathing.
Now, for the HRV, what is, and I don't want to go into too much detail about this, but what are the one or two devices that you recommend for
HRV?
HRV.
You know what? Like you said, it's such a rabbit hole to talk about devices. The one thing that I would say is, if you are interested in getting a device, then make sure you do your research on it, because there are some out there that are just, it's kind of the in thing to have, but knowing what you're looking for, making sure that if you are monitoring your heartbeat, that it gets monitored 256 times a second, not once every 3 seconds, which is what some of the devices monitor. So getting something that is accurate, and and I always recommend for my clients is to wear a chest strap, because when we're wearing a chest strap, our heart rate or heartbeats are monitored all the time.
Right.
And I've heard some great things about the Visible app. You wear an armband. I also heard that the Visible app was going to have a heart rate variability measure whilst doing breathing exercises, which is, once again, that is a powerful feedback of I'm breathing correctly and my heart rate variability is getting stronger.
Yes.
So that's what we're kind of looking for. And then, of course, knowing these exercises to do prior to going to sleep, because like I said, that is also something that really gets affected both in perimenopause and menopause. Some of it has to do with the changes in our hormones, that we increase in weight. And when we increase in weight, we tend to slide into, again, fight or flight, but also our necks and our tongues get larger when that happens, and they become less muscular because we lose some of those hormones. We get sleep apnea because our tongue slips down our throat, we start snoring, or it wakes us up during the night, or we stop breathing. So it's important that we have tongue exercises to do. I know it sounds menial, but it's very important to keep this part of your neck strong, your tongue. They kind of, everything comes full circle, but having that functional breathing, we're always functional breathing. So that those 25,000 breaths a day, we are using our nose. We are, as Jackie said, using our diaphragm and keeping our breath nice and rhythmical. That just goes with our body. And then learning what we call self-regulation or emergency exercises that we can turn to in those moments of, oh my gosh, what's happening?
Yes.
And, there's not, so for menstrual cycle, there's a lot of research in how breathing can help. Perimenopause, menopause, there's not a lot of research, but there's one paper that sits out there and says for women that are going through perimenopause and menopause, by doing cadence breathing twice a day for 15 minutes, will decrease your hot flashes by 50. So cadence breathing. Okay, that's a big one. But we have to preface that by saying a cadence breath is an inhale of 4 and an exhale of 6. Now, for people with long COVID or some of the other chronic illnesses, asking a person to just start breathing like that would actually put us into fight or flight. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's like kind of at the end of the rainbow as far as teaching breathing exercises. It's something you really need to build up to. So waiting until you're in perimenopause to learn to breathe, it's like start as soon as you can. Start learning other exercises that are going to increase the strength of your diaphragm. And even starting cadence breathing, like a 2 in and a 3 out. We're working on that longer exhale to get our body into that parasympathetic. And that's why what Jackie and I do is so gratifying, because we are giving people these emergency exercises. And one of the things is we tell them, do them when you feel good, because you don't want to wait until you start sliding down that slippery slope to go, oh yeah, I think someone told me about, cadence breathing. I think I'll start it right now. This is almost a training program. We don't go to the gym and pick up 100-kilogram weights on our first attempt. We start slowly. We have to be so gentle with ourselves. And then by learning the basis, the foundation, and then slowly adding in various exercises that work for us. And I think that's one of the the great things about the program that we teach is the variety of exercises that Jackie and I both developed for people with long COVID that you can then modify for individual needs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I feel like there are a lot of great tidbits within this discussion. And I will be actually interviewing y'all for the summit. And so for those of you who are watching it during the summit, we'll have more time. So we'll ask Vicky and Jackie to take us through a short breathing exercise that we can do together. But if you're interested in this, of course, I'll put the link to their course in the description for this episode. And just thank you both so much. This is a fascinating topic and really great to get your wise, thoughtful experience, input, and wisdom. I'm gonna repeat that word again.
And experience. We've been through this.
Right, exactly. Yes. Yeah. So thank you both so much. Yeah, I think that's it. Just thank you all for watching as well. And I just want to give y'all Jackie and Vicky a chance to say goodbye, and then I'll do my little sign off. Yeah. So if you want to say goodbye to.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thanks. Thanks so much. We hope that I think Vicky's touched on this. You've touched on it, Lorrie, as well. It's that measure of control. I think it's James Nestor, the quote about "You're the pilot, not the passenger." And I read this quote. I actually put it out on my podcast socials the other day because I just remembered how powerful it was. And when something like long COVID happens, all you feel is you're flailing. You've no idea what's going on. Your body is not your own. It's like you have no idea what's going on. And finding that first thing is just such a hugely powerful thing. And for me, it was the breath. I think for Vicky, it was the same. It's that, okay, well, I may not have any control over some of this stuff, but I am able to start to control my reaction to it. And I think, the breath is just such a powerful tool, for everybody, to help us with our resilience, but also as our response to stress when stress happens, because stress will keep happening. All the time. We can't avoid stress, but what we can do is be more resilient when it does happen. And I think that's something that's hugely powerful. So yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. So thank you both for being here so much. And for those of you who are watching, please do make sure to share this with anybody that you think would benefit from it, which I think if you're a woman, you're going to benefit from this discussion. And and I hope to see you actually on the summit as well with Vicky and Jackie. And again, I'll put a link to their program down in the description.
Thank you for having us, Lorrie.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having us.
All right. Yeah, it was wonderful.